Welcome to the Liberation Lab podcast, insights and interviews for the disruptive educator. I'm honored to have my sis on. I'm going to let her introduce herself. So why don't you tell the people who you are, what you do, and why you do it?
All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Shauna Brown. Thank you, Bobby, my dear brother, for having me on this evening. I'm so grateful just to be in community with you. I know we recorded maybe about 3 years ago, I believe, actually 2021 for the first time when you were on
Yes.
live. But I am an educator. I am the founder of Teach for the Culture, LLC, which is both a movement and a business. I've been in education quite a while, just about almost 20 years now. I do curriculum. I've been classroom teacher, administrator, district consultant, state Department of Ed consultant. And so, but I'm grateful to be in this work.
My sis does all the things, all the things. You know, when I was thinking about our conversation and what it would entail and where to go, I could think of no other space but to center joy in our conversation. Every time that we have had the opportunity to interact, when I come across what you put out, you take a deeply critical lens to centering joy in learning. So I want to start off our time with this question, particularly amidst the backdrop of the political scene, as it were, today. Isn't joy just some other thing that you're asking teachers to do? Like, why such a focus there when we have to get these kids reading and learning and all the things?
So one of my signature quotes is joy and learning must coexist. So meaning the two of them have to come together. It's not an extra thing. Joy to me is something that we carry. It's inside everyone. It's just a matter of when it gets tapped. And if you think about the work that we have to do in schools and learning and all of the things, think about what joy makes you feel versus what stress, fear, or pressure make you feel. Which one drains you more and which one gives you more energy? The joy actually gives you the energy to do the work, to continue the work, to lean into the work, versus a joyless atmosphere is a spiritless atmosphere. And with that, you get drained. And I know sometimes our institutions tend to drain all of us, both adults and children. And that is actually counterproductive to learning. So for me, when you center joy, like you can't disconnect that from the learning. You can't disconnect it from the spirit, from the heart, from the humanity of it all. And if we're really going to be human-centered in education, to me, joy has to be a part of that. And so it's always been critical to my own practice as an educator and my life in general. And so it goes from way back to childhood, and I brought it right through up through education. And I can get into that too if you want.
No, for sure. Because, I think about the necessity of joy, and not in a sense of, like you said, an addition, but more like, a central piece with spokes on a wheel, right? Like everything comes from this place of joy. So we learn with joy, we interact with joy, we critique and construct with joy, we challenge with joy, right? All these different things should be a part of our dynamic. But here's the rub. I think that if you and I could say the word joy, and then there are, let's say 100 people who will listen, and they will have 75 different definitions of what they mean when they say joy. So when you say joy, what do you mean?
That's a great question. And you're right on point with that. I think because some people think of joy and they think, oh, fun. That means everything has to be fun. But to me, joy is a part of your very being, your very essence. It's a part of your humanity. So joy, the way it manifests and what sparks it, to me, it is different for everyone. No two people are going to feel joy or experience joy in the same exact way, but everyone carries it within. For me, when I talk about joy and learning, it's not one way. It can't be one way, right? It can't be prescribed either. We can't just write it into the lesson plan and say, oh, today we're going to feel joy today. It's part of your very humanity, your very existence. And especially as people of African descent, it's part of our way of being, our lifestyle, our worldview, and our culture. And so, again, there's not one way to experience it or express it. It can be expressed in very different ways. Some people feel joy from solving a math problem. Other people feel joy when a music comes on. Some people feel joy by being out in nature. Others may feel joy by, having something correct. So there's all different, forms of joy. But to me, it definitely can't be prescribed. It's just a part of who we are. It's a essential part of our humanity.
I think much of the problem within education comes in when we will look past the people, look
Mm.
past the students, look past those with who we've been entrusted to serve, and try to get to the data, the metrics, the standards, right? And I hear me, for all cards on the table, I am a proponent of let's give kids access to grade level work. Let's make sure that we're giving the best of ourselves to our students and that we're challenging them to grow. At the same time, our dear brother in this work, Dr. Chris Emden, says we teach students before standards,
That's it.
right? And in that order, he says, or it's not teaching at all. And so I love that quote, but why do you think there's such a propensity for us to just look beyond the persons in front of us, the people, the humanity, and try to just get this transactional relationship that we have in education?
Whew. It's a deep question. And to me, it's also very layered. But it starts with the ways in which we dehumanize students in schools, the ways in which institutions dehumanize the people that are supposed to be served by the institution. It's really deep. It goes into um, just the whole reason we're even there. So some institutions see us being there as like products. So yes, if you're a product, it's transactional. I give you this, you give it back. I teach this, now I score this. Now you get it back. There is very, like you said, transactional. And that is actually dehumanizing if we're just basing everything on transactions versus people's lives, humanity, and all of that. I think also with an emphasis on, high stakes testing, that sometimes can take out some of the humanity when we start to see people and each other just as more numbers, when schools start to see educators just as bodies that need to be there doing a thing versus these are people with lives who are trying to inspire and touch other lives. And so it's tied to just the whole system of schooling, to be honest, because outside of school, children do learn naturally in a very joyful way.
Mm,
And they go
yeah.
into school wanting to experience that same thing. And over time, that is kind of it's kind of taken away. It's like chips. And I
Yeah.
find that as much as they go up through the grades, it's like just chipped away, chipped away, chipped away until they're almost programmed or conditioned to experience school as joyless, right? Besides interactions with friends and, lunchtime and things like that, where they can be more free, they start to experience school with, less joy. And so,
It's so interesting because, so as you know, we were just talking about it before we hit record. This is year one for me in the principal seat. And one of the things that I've been learning as we kind of go along is how you have to navigate being written into the middle of a story, right? So prior to me, there were other principals. There's a story in the school, educators that might lack buy-in to you because you might be the latest in a line of people who have been, in and through and all of these things. But the other side of that too is the students. I find that because they've had previous experiences with, different administrators who maybe their bent was, I'm going to show you who's in charge. And then they come meet me and I'm like, tell me what's wrong. It throws them like something is completely off about that for them. And rebuilding that trust and redefining what that relationship could look like is sometimes hard
absolutely.
because they have a preconceived notion about schooling. So with that, this kind of brings me to your experience, right? You said that joy has been a central tenet for you from early on. And I find that, like you said, schools have a way of snuffing that out. how did you preserve your joy? Take us kind of through your story
Right.
in education.
Absolutely. So my mother was actually a teacher for a long time. She taught for 40 years. And my father, although not a teacher by profession, he still believes strongly in education. My grandmother, most of my family, and culturally, joy is just a part of kind of their way of being. And so growing up in the household, they would always make learning joyful and fun. So no matter what we're doing, it could be something, whatever, on a road trip or whatever it was, we're having fun, but they're making sure we're learning at the same time. And so that was my experience from home. I went to a Catholic school from K to 6, not joyful.
You don't
That was
say.
not my experience there, was not joyful at many times. I mean, I did have fun there, but it wasn't joyful. Like, to me, when you're experiencing joy, you can be your full self. And without being your full self, you can't really experience joy. And so in that Catholic school, at the time, K to 5, there's only a few. There were no black teachers. There was only a few other black students at the time there. I'm not Catholic, and everything was kind of centered around that. So I had to navigate a lot. But to balance that off, my parents had us in a African centered performing arts school. So we'd go there after school in summers. And that was beginning at age 3 all the way to age 18. Full of joy, learning about myself, learning about my culture, being able to African dance and express myself, and being around others who truly poured into me. And I could see, like, even from a young age, that contrast between here I'm learning and this is not joyful at all. And so it's actually taking from me, or like I'm having to shrink myself to fit into the space. Whereas here I'm learning, I'm being my full self, and I'm feeling joy, and I'm learning a lot, and I'm retaining it, right? It's like staying with me, it's resonating with me more. So I can also remember getting to, in college, there was this professor who said something, she made a remark, it's like an urban education, and she made a remark that children growing up in poverty can't experience joy. And I was like, that's false. She was not from the community. She did not look like me, but she was quick to say that if you're from a community with lower socioeconomic status, you're not able to experience joy. And I knew firsthand that that was not true. And that also is something else that stuck with me. And I'm like, when I start teaching, I'm going to make sure that my students experience that people know that this is a thing, and it's actually a very powerful thing. And so when I got to the classroom, again, I incorporated, that joyful learning. My students' scores were blowing people out the way through the city.
Mm,
And I wasn't just sticking to, yes, it was a time of No Child Left Behind, but it wasn't just like, drill, 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 drill. It was humanity, joyful learning. This is who you are. So all of those things that kind of go into students being able to experience the education freely and fully as themselves. And again, to me, that's another essential part. And just being in community and building community. And then I visited Ghana, West Africa, on a Fulbright. And I remember going to a cultural center, which was also a school, and seeing the kids, and they were turned up. When I tell you, Bobby, they were turned up, dancing and moving in the joy. And I was like, yes. I was like, this is what we are missing in a lot of
missing.
places in the States. But I
Right.
could see that kind of just them being their full selves, not having to worry about any kind of gaze, surveillance. Nope, your hair can't be like this. Nope, you're too dark, you're too light, all that stuff was like out the window, and they just could be themselves and be free. And I saw full joy. And I was like,
Mm,
yes, yes, yes. And then one more thing that really kind of stuck out to me along that journey. So as a high school assistant principal, we brought students to Google to visit, and that whole learning atmosphere. So like people in high school, like, oh, we have to do this because we have to prepare you for the real world. We have to prepare you for the real world. We took those kids to Google. That workspace was joyful in all different aspects, in just the physical space, what they're allowed to do, the freedoms. They had like a little nap pod. They had all these things that recognize that people are humans. And in order for them to be their best, they have to feel their best and feel full. And so that was another thing. So it's just, I see it all the time where I'm like, yes, this is why we need joy and learning to coexist.
The process of extracting joy, if you will, from our babies. Yes, it is interpersonal. It could be, other students. It could be teachers with that understanding. But one place that I think we might overlook is how it's embedded and ingrained in our policies and practices.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm saying this as somebody who is entrusted to lead within an institution that doesn't necessarily center joy, right? And so there are ways in which our policies will police the black body but fail to ignite the black mind. And so I care about what you're wearing. Are you in dress code? Are you in uniform? Are you wearing these shoes with these soles, with these socks? Are you in your seat? Can I see your hands? Do you have your pencil in your hand? I care everything about what your body is doing, because embedded in that policy is a threat or a perception of a threat, rather than understanding the genius that we get to tap into every single day. So educators who are listening, who, let's just say, this might be their first exposure to this, and now they have to figure out their paradigm shift. Where can they start to kind of unlearn these things to be able to begin the process of ensuring that they themselves bring joy in themselves, but also they do it in this work?
So the roots to me go back to colonialism.
My.
So incorporating joy as part of your learning framework is decolonial. It's anti-colonial. This system of like all the things that you just named, if you trace the root, so as educators, if you go back and trace the roots to where that comes from a colonial system and part of the culture of many places that colonize the world. The 8% of the world population that colonized 80% of the world. It goes right back to there. You can trace it directly back. There's a saying in, I believe it's England, where they talk about having a stiff upper lip as part of the culture. And so, meaning, to be presentable, to be acceptable, you're not supposed to show expression. It's the very proper, if you
Mm-hmm.
will, culturally. That is not of African descent.
Right, right.
And the systems that were, set in place to punish, to police, it goes straight back. It goes all the way back to colonialism. If you look
Mm.
at even some of the schools today that were run by, colonial powers, that is where that comes from. And so to begin to uproot that, I think educators and we all have to start to understand where it comes from, how it manifests, and how we can like uproot that. And then begin to, as we learn that, we also have to connect with ourselves also. Because I find that a lot of people who are not able to tap into the joy or spark the joy in others is because they are not able to find it within themselves. And it can still be seen anywhere around the world where colonial powers took over and started schools. It's still there. It's deeply embedded. Those, the roots of having school spaces that are dehumanizing, because that's really what it is when we take the joy out of it, goes straight back to the colonial way of thinking and the colonial set of schools that we've never really fully gotten away from. So there are pockets, I would say, within the states where that paradigm is not the major paradigm, but again, there are pockets. But I think as an educator, if you are to, so first going back and peeling back the layers, like where did this come from? Of school the way it is, why do we incorporate shaming, why is there the policing, why the uniform, why all of that, they will see where the root is. It goes straight back to the colonial days. But also, like, as a person or interpersonally as an educator, if you are able to, okay, let me flip it around. If you are not able to tap into your own joy, it's going to be hard to spark that joy in someone else. And so letting yourself be yourself and be free and actually experiencing joy is going to help you tap into the joy of others and kind of spark that within others. So it's both structural, It's systemic, it's institutional, and then it's interpersonal, just like
Yeah,
racism.
that part. I saw a video of this practice that apparently they do at Success Academy. I was watching the video and I happened to be at a conference and they showed this practice they called rip and redo. Have you seen this? For those who don't know, let me tell you what it is. This baby had finished some work that the teacher, I guess, deemed incorrect.
Mm-hmm.
And not only did she, because when you said shame, it made me think of this.
Mm-hmm.
Not only did she lay into this little girl, but she took the paper that the little girl worked on, ripped it in front of her and the class,
Mm-hmm.
and said, go back over to this table that's over there by yourself and go redo it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a father of two.
Mm-hmm.
If you rip my baby's work
Mm-hmm.
and you berate him in front of his classmates, and then you ask him to go sit in a corner to go do some work, I'm going to jail that day, just on site.
Period.
It's just. So I'm a call. I'm gonna be like, Shauna, you have bail money because I am going to jail.
Period. And again, the roots go straight back to colonialism. So both of my parents went to school in Jamaica under British rule while the country was still colonized. They hadn't even been free yet. And so the system, so they were taught by all people from England, colonial schools. If you got something wrong, you had to put a dunce hat on your head. They would have kids stand on one leg and touch your nose, label you as all these degrading things in front of the class. That's the norm. That's how colonialism operates, right? And so if you look at a school like the example you just gave, where it's ripping the paper and throwing it away, it's dehumanizing someone's work, someone's creation that came from them, that they did, something they put out. You're gonna look in their face and rip it up and throw it out and say, like, what is supposed to be the outcome of that, right? And not just the outcome on paper, but the outcome right here as part of them as a human being. And so if we're looking at students as whole, we would consider the whole outcome, not just the paper being ripped and you redoing it. But what did that do to that student in that moment? And that's how they strip sometimes. They strip their humanity from our kids.
I look at that and yeah, I think it's easy on this side of history, right? In terms of my growth and development, to look at that and say, man, how could you? And I've said this to you, but I was, I started in Camden. I was that teacher. Maybe not that way, but I was the dehumanizing teacher. I did the, no, it's silent deduction, step out in the hallway, write a reflection. I did all of that in the name of I gotta help these babies learn. And so I bought into the lies of teach like a champion. And hear me, I've grown a lot since I first said this. I don't think that the intent of that is let's just disparage every young person. But when you have these tactics and these way of teaching that is set on dehumanizing, no joy, you're not looking at the person, you're not trying to get to root causes, there is no humanity in the process, you are going to do more harm than good. And I'm saying this as someone who did it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, no one's like, I also participated in some things as an educator that I should not have. But guess what? It's because that's what we learned, right? Coming up, like it was not like it was something that's not normal. It was like, I know for my high school, it was very much, that policing, surveillance, all of that. And yeah, and so there were things certainly that I've grown from, after being an educator. And you're right, like people don't set out to say, oh, I'm going to work today so that I can degrade a student. I'm going to work today to shame a student. I think some people actually think that that is going to help them, right? But once you hear, the stories of, or if you take time to listen to the stories of how a young person feels, then you'll know what the real impact.
So let's imagine for a second that we get to freedom dream together and build a school that centers joy? What are, like, you can't do all the things in this short conversation, but what were some things that you would prioritize in order to ensure joy was a centerpiece in the construction of that school?
So I would say, so number one is students to be themselves and allowing yourself to be yourself. Like that's just almost like ground level. So that freedom
Hmm.
to be you. Belonging also has to be another part. Having choice and agency. So if you're always forced only to do things one way and everyone has to do it this way, like within the colonial structure traditionally, that's not joyful because you're not having the freedom to choose or that agency. I would say also the incorporation of a lot of time to work in community and together as opposed to just working isolation. I did a survey a few years ago. I had about 3,000 or 4,000 survey respondents, and I asked them about what things joy K 12. And so there was like a number of things that came out that I was able to like kind of synthesize together or kind of categorize, and I developed a framework based on that. These were some of the things that were kind of a part of that. You know, the incorporation of music, the incorporation of creativity, just being able to be yourself. And I think all of those things are part of things that help to make a more joyful learning space. I'm always cautious though to say, okay, we're gonna build a school around joy because of what you said in the beginning, which is people have different perceptions of what they think joy is. And some people may hear, oh, we're going to incorporate joy. And then all of a sudden that becomes an initiative as opposed to a way of being, a way of living, a part of our culture. And so, I'm always, cautious of that as well. So, because it's broad. There's many ways to kind of incorporate it. I would say though, I also am an adjunct professor, and the same framework, the same kinds of things I use. I use K-12. I did with my grad students. I
Hmm.
brought that whole
Hmm.
joyful learning framework in without saying we are going to bring a joyful learning framework. But the responses on the survey after the course was done, like for last semester, that kept coming up. All the things that were like incorporated that may not have been in another space all came out as yes, I actually felt joy taking this class. I actually enjoyed this. And so
So as we are rounding out to our time here, I want to honor your time. But you mentioned framework, the work that you do, and kind of just your work on both K to 12 and higher ed of incorporating, infusing, centering joy. Well, I want to ask you about your framework, but before I do that, I wanted to just touch on something that you just said, and that is what I hope educators hear from this conversation and from you in particular is that joy is not one single flow of expression. And that if you're going to get to the root of what joy can look like, you must first look at the students that you serve, the community that you serve, because that joyful expression might look different in Willingboro, in Connecticut, in New York, in LA. It's going to look different depending on where you are because of the genius of the students and the community that you serve. And so I hope that folks hear that and don't walk away from and say, you know what, I'm going to put on some music tomorrow and that's going to be it.
right, that's it. And like you said, sometimes you can't even. It's not even how it looks because you can't see it, but someone else can feel it. Is what is an
Yeah.
experience. Like I know I
Yeah.
asked, like my own father was one of the participants, and I said, "What brought you joy?" He said, "Solving a math problem." So someone looking from the outside, they don't know that you're experiencing like a high level of joy just by doing that because you may be looking serious and looking down and doing work. So it's not just jumping around and it's each person being able to experience and be centered in their humanity within the learning space and be free to learn and free to be themselves.
That's real good. Talk to us about your framework, and plug where folks could tap into your genius, as we're rounding out our time.
Thank you. Yeah, so the framework is called the Joy and Learning Framework. Is based on, I have a trademark called Joy and Learning Must Coexist. So I've built, like I said, I did the research around that. It's been a part of kind of my way of being as a learner and as an educator. And so the framework is something that I work with schools on because I also do consulting. And a lot of it starts with self-work and then looking at how kind of these things can be incorporated, or what things can be incorporated or included within a school or educational setting, or even home, right? So I have that. I have a podcast. It's not all the way up and running, but it's called Joyful Pedagogies, and that is talking to educators about their own pedagogy and how they have found joy within it and how they're able to spark that joy within their learning space. And that's on Instagram at Joyful Pedagogies. And I also have a another ebook coming out called The Pedagogy of Soul, and that's another page called Pedagogy of Soul. And it incorporates some of the joyful elements kind of inherently, but it also just connects pedagogy with the culture of like sneakers and fashion and things like that. And I have the Black Joy Summit as well. Can't hear you.
When is that? Sorry, I was on mute.
Didn't hear your question.
I said, when is that? When is the Black Joy Summit?
So
Do
the
you have a
next
date?
one, the next one is going to be in April. And the last one was last summer. So
Yep.
I would
Yep.
love to push it up because I feel like we need the conversations now. I feel like, again, like I said in the beginning, joy, when you're centering joy in the work, you get more fuel to do the work as opposed to feeling drained. Like if you're always just fighting and resisting, it gets draining. If something is driven by joy, you have the energy and you're able to engage more and more deeply and more meaningfully within the work. So that's
Yeah,
coming up in April.
that's real, because I think even now, we referenced it before, but the political landscape of so much uncertainty, is there going to be a Department of Education? Will there not be a Department of Education? Are they cutting funding from anything that they labeled DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion? I like to say the whole thing and make them say it.
Yes.
Are they going to do all of that? But here's my where I stand today. And that is, budgets are going to come and go.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to change. I could have this much this day, this much next day. But what they can't tap into is when a authentic educator who loves what they do, who buys into the expression of joy within oneself, brings that authenticity and ignites a love of learning and joy and challenge and all of those things that we love about educating our babies. If they do that, there's no legislation in the world that can stop.
No, there's not. And even just as a people, or people who are kind of the target of the dismantling of the diversity, equity, and inclusion, which,
That part.
like, you can't do that. But having us being rooted in that joy, that's what has brought us through. Like, for 400 years of being in this country, that is what has brought us through. Even people who were enslaved, they endured a lot, but their spirit wasn't broken all the way, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't taken all the way. It may be, there may be a damper put on, but you can never break the spirit of resilience, and that includes joy. That's within it. So
Yeah. Um So, sis, I want to say, thank you first and foremost for your work, your genius, what you pour into educators and so many who have been following. Tap into your genius. Thank you for what you've personally poured into me. I know that I am a far better educator being in community with folks like yourself. And so even in this time, I want to make sure I honor you, give you your flowers while you can still spell them. But for folks who are new, and I know you plugged it already, but I just want to give them another opportunity to make sure they tap into you and your genius. Where can they find you and where can they support you?
thank you so much. And thank you again for having me. I truly appreciate it. And just, the love is reciprocal. You have poured into me just as much. And I'm just grateful to be in community with you as well over the last, 6 years at least.
It's been a while.
Yes. But yeah, so I'm on Instagram. It's at Teach for the Culture, one word, or at joyful.pedagogies. My website is teachfortheculture.com. That's one word. There you can, subscribe to the newsletter, reach out to schedule a call, send an email. Let's see, where else? Yeah, so those are my main two. So yeah, Instagram, the website, and you can always reach out. And then there's Joyful Pedagogies and Pedagogy of Soul. I also, one more thing, I have another, because I do believe in like building community. So I have another
Please.
organization called Educators Who Brunch. And that's one word on Instagram, Educators Who Brunch. And so we do, it's kind of a way to connect with educators, meet up. We have, brunches, and just we're able to fellowship together.
Which absolutely think that educators who are listed, please tap in. Hitting the follow button is free. Tapping in, but also I'm going to encourage you, please head to the website. The genius that you heard, the curriculum is on a t-shirt as well. Go ahead and grab one of those and support her work and what she puts out into the world. So I'll put that in the show notes, and folks, please tap into her genius. But sis, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.